I've been torturing myself over this video for a couple of months now. It's just one of those ones that I don't want to get wrong. George Lynch has been a huge influence on my playing. He was the first rock player that I really got into. I was transcribing as much of his music as I could find in the early days. And he actually became probably like the bedrock of my own style in those early years. The funny thing is that a lot of that happened by me getting his parts wrong. How exactly do you explain that? Well, in essence, that's what this whole Top 5 Habits of series and playlist on my channel is about. Let's check it out. So in case you don't know who I'm talking about, George Lynch is the lead guitar player in an 80s, 90s band called Dokken. He moved on to a band called Lynch Mob, and he's done some other stuff since. If you don't know who he is yet, definitely check him out. I picked up guitar back in the late 80s. It was actually August of 86 to be specific. And I was a huge fan of Dokken's early work. Tooth and Nail and Under Lock and Key come to mind. And the first music that I was learning to transcribe myself was actually Dokken music. And I filled up some notebooks. I've got one of them over here. I filled up some notebooks, binders, with tablature that I was making back in the day, and definitely wore out some vinyl records, moving the needle back and forth, trying to figure out his parts. And when I did that, I had only been playing for a year or two, and so in learning that music and transcribing it, it was advanced stuff, and I was getting a lot of it wrong. I was getting it close, but it wasn't quite right, as I've seen when I've gone back and looked at the old transcriptions since. But it's in that getting it almost right that I kind of built the bedrock, as I said before, of my own style in an attempt to play something that somebody else was doing and actually playing something that was just similar instead. So all that said, let me look at 5 of the things that I saw George commonly do, and let's talk about how you can take those ideas and turn them into your own kind of ideas. So after that little acoustic part there, I went into a piece that definitely sounds very Dokken as it is. And in this lesson, I'm probably going to sound a little bit more like the original than I do in most of these habits lessons because, as I said, it's a big part of my own playing style, so it's going to be easy to stick close to what he's doing. But anyway, that said, the first habit is how you can take basic power chords and change the fifth to different notes and create some cool voicings that way. So I take this basic E power chord, and I can go from this fifth to the minor sixth. Stuff like he does in Unchain the Night. You can go to the diminished fifth. And seeing all that kind of stuff broke me out of just playing. I started thinking about what voicings I can add, and as I got to learn the modes, I learned when I could use major sixth, minor sixth. In this case, we were in E minor / G major. And I should mention here, I'm tuned the same way George tuned, which is not fully a half step flat. It's somewhere between the low stringing an E flat and an E. I did that just as an homage to what he was doing back then. And so, in any case, when I was playing in this little piece that I showed you there, it's when I got to the C chord, it has the C and the G, and in the key of G, the 7th is an F sharp, so you end up with that C diminished. So I can play. All those voicings and playing chords in a way where you're adding the voicing just with the fifth moving around is the first habit a lot of people take away from George Lynch's playing. Okay, what you saw there are actually the second and third habits that I picked from George Lynch's lead playing, which one is what I'll call the double tap.
Second rule, the double tap.
And the other is to mix slides to the tops of fast loops or fast parts. So what you saw me do there was this thing where I went something in that vein there, and that was kind of a triple tap actually. But it was to take a part that might otherwise be something really difficult that you have to play a lot of notes in a tapping type of thing. And really adding to the legato quality of it, to the complexity, at least as far as it sounds to the ear, by double tapping the note. And then I mixed the slides in. So it can be a very useful tool. The double tapping part can be a very useful tool in any kind of situation where you want to add more complexity to it as far as what the ear hears without adding complexity to what you're playing. And the slides just give it a cool lilting quality and give you a place to go that you wouldn't normally think of when you're doing any kind of right hand tapping. Even slow like that. Remember that your right hand can do a lot of the things that you'd normally do with your left hand when you're in a tapping situation, and that's the real big takeaway there. So as I come to the very end, the climactic part of that little mini 8-bar solo there, you see me do something in which I do what I call like a wide interval spread. Now normally when you play a fast passage at the end of something, you've been learning pentatonics or just learning your diatonic scales, you tend to keep things in that grouping that is 3, 4, maybe 5 frets separated. And so in this instance, the whole thing's in E minor, and so I'm playing here off the note G, and in this position, you could think of it as the top of the Logarian position, the way I teach it anyway. And you have those 6 notes. You could be playing something, if you're playing diatonically and keeping it all together. What I got from George would be to play the wide interval and skip the second note, and then play the top note, or the highest note, and then the next note that would come after that, almost in the next position of the scale that you would normally play. So for me, I played, even though these are the same note, it doesn't matter, it sounds cool. I'm playing it fast. It gets a little bit sloppy, I'm hitting an open string in there, but in the instance of the ending part of a solo like that, some of that slop's actually kind of cool. It adds to the noisy, energetic quality of it, which is something that I got from George's playing too. Not that he played sloppy, but he let a lot of energy out in parts that were big and climactic endings like that. And I like to do that myself. I'm less worried about the technique and more worried about the feeling that I'm getting. And maybe it's a mix of technique and feeling. So it's okay to miss here and there as long as I get the emotion of it across. And so again, this works all over the place. I could take something that's like a typical pentatonic run and widen out the interval. Makes for a lot of cool, different things that you wouldn't normally think of just by spreading out to the next position or a note in the next position that you'd normally play in. And the last and probably most important takeaway I got from learning music early on that George Lynch was playing with Dokken is that a solo needs to be constructed. You don't just randomly go in and play a bunch of notes and play anything that has any meaning or adds value to the song. If you listen to the solos on the Under Lock and Key record, the quality of a beginning, middle, and end to each solo is there. And I'm going to play you the entire piece of music that I was grabbing the snippets from here so you can hear what I'm talking about. Let's roll that and we'll talk about it. So when we get to the solo part there, I'm only soloing for 8 measures, but I definitely gave it a beginning, middle, and end. And so the beginning, I start with a melody. Some kind of theme, something that you could hum back. And then I build to something a little more intense. And in this case, there's not a big middle section because, again, it's only 8 measures. Normally, if I'm constructing something I'm going to do the melody. I'm going to wander away a little bit, do the melody, but with some kind of flavor to it. And then I'll build to a climax, which in this case became that part where I built up and then did the fast, which we went over already. Did the fast part to work as a complete climax to the solo. So the important thing is beginning, middle, end. Construct your solos, even when you're improvising and have to put pieces together, which, by the way, I think I remember reading that when the Under Lock and Key album was done, that George had improvised a bunch of solos and they were pulling pieces from it and constructing them a little bit in the studio as well, which can work out really good sometimes, especially if you have a great producer who has an ear for these things. You can collaborate with them and end up with something really cool that way that you may not have thought of, and it can be exciting to go back and actually relearn your own parts from parts you did before. But I babble. In any case, the point being, think about construction. Think of your solo as a mini composition. Give it a beginning, a middle, and an end. Build to a climax. Make something out of it. And so those are the top 5 habits that I'm giving you and that I took away from George in my early figuring out of what he was doing musically. There are a couple other little things that I took away from his music that I wouldn't call his top habits, so to speak, because they're widely used, but he was the first time I heard them. One of them is to use half bends. A lot of times when you're first learning music and your first scale is the pentatonic scale, every bend you do, which is inherent to the pentatonic itself, is a full bend. And with a lot of his playing, he was incorporating more of the diatonic scale, and it gave opportunities for half note, 1 fret bends, and those became a very important part of his style and something that I think adds to the expressiveness of a solo. You can think of Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd as being chock full of half bends and having that kind of emotion. And also with George, he does a lot of stuff with crazy wide vibratos where he's sliding up and down from the note rather than just doing a bend vibrato. Some of that stuff when you're playing where you're getting really wild and out there and really letting a lot of emotion out can be very cool. So I hope I did the guy justice. As I said, he's one of my all-time favorite players, and I hope that you are able to see the ideas here and take them away and find ways to incorporate them into your own music that don't just sound like you're playing Dokken music, but rather are growing the ideas into something that you can use for yourself. If you have any questions or comments or further ideas about what we've talked about here, please leave it in the comments below. I always get back to everybody. And until next time, keep making great music. Hey friends, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. It makes the whole world better.